He continues to say, why even bother showing up? But there's still an 11th hour potential he could show up, right, Christian? But it's looking likely it's a no.
That's true. I mean, there are reports saying that he's been asking people, should he participate in the debates? But I think Trump's strategy right now as to not participating in the debates is rising above the GOP field right now. I think he understands that if he debates, he's going to be seen on equal level with Ron DeSantis, Tim Scott, the top three candidates right now. But I think Trump is trying to figure out, does he really want to enter into this debate? Does he want to open up the door to attacks from any of his rivals?
Yeah, well, to this point, he's gotten some criticism from some of his opponents, like Chris Christie, for example, who posted on X earlier that he was a verified coward. But historically speaking, the front runner is in the position to skip the debate, right? Or perhaps that is, in fact, the smart thing to do, even if you face criticism for it, Peggy.
Well, I think, Kailey, as Christian just said, whether Trump skips the debate or not, he's going to be there, even if it's just looming over the entire conversation. Because a lot of what they're going to be doing, whether it's Chris Christie or it's Ron DeSantis or Tim Scott, as Christian said, they're going to have to be answering about how they feel about Trump and the fact that he is facing these legal indictments that are going to crisscross with the campaign and key dates next year. And that's going to overshadow a lot of the issues that Americans are thinking about in their everyday lives, which is, what are you going to do about the economy? What's going to happen with us in terms of the global landscape around the world? And so I do think Trump's going to be there whether he's there physically or not.
When you look at some of the individuals that are actually going to be on the debate stage, and that could change, a bunch of them are still trying to make this threshold. Everyone lately has been having to answer this question, Peggy, and I know you used to cover the Fed very closely and still do, about whether or not Jay Powell should remain at that post. What do you make of all of their answers?
Well, it's interesting because I think, as Annmarie, as you said, it's become a flashpoint in terms of, whether or not the Fed is doing the right job or not for the American people. But also it's a key into one of the biggest issues that are also hanging over the election next year, which is, how do Americans feel about inflation? It's something that so many people have felt all around the country, whether it's grocery prices or gas prices. I know Christian and I were talking earlier when he was in Iowa last week. That was something you heard from a lot of people on the ground in Iowa. Right, Christian?
That's correct. I mean, people were really concerned about gas prices. The economy is definitely front of mind for voters in this upcoming election.
And so I'm sure that's going to be something that the candidates, in between having to address Trump and not take digs at him or take digs at him, are going to be talking about. When we talk about the people who have made the stage, though, I feel like it's still kind of fuzzy. You had Francis Suarez, for example, the mayor of Miami, tweeting today or posting on X that he has qualified for the debate. He made the donor threshold. Unclear about the polling, though, and we haven't actually heard from the RNC. And there, of course, also is the issue of the pledge. Candidates who we know have qualified, like Chris Christie, for example, haven't signed it. So there's a whole lack of clarity around this, Christian, and I feel like it's getting harder for the RNC.
Yeah, I mean, with the exception of Donald Trump, getting on the debate stage is a make or break moment. I was talking to a strategist, and he was telling me that, not being on this stage this week is a campaign ender. So I think a lot of these candidates are trying to do what they have to do to get on the stage because they understand how important it is to their campaign, but also to, the future of their political career. It's a really big deal.
And as we've been talking about the former president, he seems to, as you say, Peggy, he's going to be there on the debate stage whether or not he's physically there, take up all the oxygen in the room. But today there was a really important, unprecedented, historic moment at Camp David when President Biden met with the leaders of South Korea and Japan. Take a listen to what he had to say.
Today, we've all reaffirmed our shared commitment to maintaining peace and stability in the Taiwan Straits and addressing economic coercion. We're going to continue to counter threats from the DPRK, including cryptocurrency money laundering to the tune of billions of dollars, potential arms transfer in support of Russia's brutal war against Ukraine. And together, we're going to stand up for international law, freedom of navigation, and the peaceful resolution of disputes in the South China Sea.
So obviously, when it comes to China, this is going to be a huge campaign issue going into next year. But Biden is actually showing that he can make big moves on this. This is a trilateral summit, which they want to continue to have. And a lot of this was pushed by the fact that these countries want to combat China.
Well, Annmarie, you're exactly right. I think one of the things that I was thinking of when I listened to the president talk this afternoon was, wow, how much has changed since not only the pandemic, but the Ukraine-Russia war. And China is such a big part of this. So this has really been like a huge shift in terms of how we deal with different countries around the world. And China is the one big piece in that puzzle. The president talked about the Taiwan Strait. He talked about the South China Sea. He talked about supply chains and how they're creating kind of an early alarm system with South Korea and with Japan. And that's all really a result of some of the strain we saw after the pandemic and after the Ukraine-Russia war.
So the president today was really focused on foreign policy. And yet, Christian, if we look back on the week that was, it really started with him in Delaware saying no comment when asked about the wildfires in Maui, and him then subsequently in the days that followed trying to really double down on his messaging around that. As the president is campaigning for re-election in 2024, how important are these foreign policy issues relative to the kitchen table issues you were just in Iowa speaking with voters about? Is he focusing potentially on the wrong thing here?
Well, I mean, the foreign policy issues are very important. I think day to day voters might not think of them, or they don't realize just how important it is, but it's a very important thing. But I also think that President Joe Biden understands that most voters don't really think about foreign policy. So that's why, I mean, he goes out on the road and he talks about the economy. He talks about jobs, because those are the issues that are impacting voters the most. I mean, I was just in Iowa, and as I was just saying earlier with Peggy, I mean, I would talk to people, and every single voter I spoke to, I asked them, what were your concerns? What are your top concerns? And the economy was in the top three each time. So those issues are really important. And I think President Joe Biden realizes that as he heads into an election.
Well, you bring it up, but is it landing? Is it landing on voters? Poll after poll, they continue to rate his handling of the economy poorly.
Well, that's interesting. I think part of it is, how do you feel about the economy, and then what's actually happening in the economy. So we have seen a lot of good numbers in terms of jobs holding up in this economy under the weight of much higher interest rates. But people don't really feel like the economy is great because, as Christian said, like they're paying more for gas. They're paying more for when they go to the grocery store. So it's kind of this, how do I feel about it? Not that great. But then not nobody, but a lot of people still have their jobs right now, which is a really key factor for President Biden.